I needed somebody new for feature strategy. I wanted to do an AI case study. So I asked Chris Miller, and then he pointed me to Dylan Selberg. It's been a HubSpot for like 7 years. Basically, ChatSpot was a Dharmesh project. It was a thing he built on the side on his own tech stack as a HubSpot integration, and it fucking took off. So they're like, God, this is a sign-up machine, but we use TARS to break it down. The target audience is a mix of HubSpot and non-HubSpot users. Adoption is really strong. Retention and satisfaction, not good. So first
the story
question,
of every AI product.
Every AI product. So the first prompt was, what questions would you ask to determine if they should ship it as a standalone product or integrate it into HubSpot, right? Mm-hmm. And so the answer is they kept it as a standalone product because it's strategically important, but it has low retention and satisfaction. It's a sign-up machine. They don't want to lose that. And they wanted to work with the early adopters to refine the use cases, right? And then the next prompt was, well, what would you do to improve retention of this feature set? And so the answer is standardized prompts instead of open-ended. He was like, open-ended chat boxes are a fucking nightmare. You shouldn't let people do that as their first activity. So they integrated it into key points. And they solved the satisfaction problem not only by fixing errors and prompts that were no good, but actually moving people to the prompts that were successful and valuable.
And did he get into the relative size of the engagement wins that these things brought?
He said the triggers thing was the biggest thing they did, improved retention by a ton.
That's so interesting. So I've been having all these conversations with others who have launched AI products, and the story is the exact same, fucking same thing.
It made me think that Google and Microsoft are barking up the wrong fucking tree, though, because they were like, well, he was like, the stuff that used HubSpot data in deep ways was the most liability of all the things you could do with it, because it's complex. Everybody's data is structured a little differently. It's hard to do right. So they have a lot more work they need to do to prompt engineer and make it smart enough to do hard stuff. So it helps the casuals, but it's actually kind of a liability for some of the hardcore users. And they were like, we can't put this in everything right now. Whereas Google and Microsoft were like, Copilot everything. And dude, I saw some tweet thread that was like, I went deep on Copilot and PowerPoint and it's not very good. So I think there's some real concerns there about oversaturation and over pushing these products early when they're not ready.
Yeah, that makes sense. But when you say barking up the wrong tree, do you mean they're going the right direction, just launching too early and therefore eroding user trust? Or it's like, oh, no, this path is a dead end?
Nabil said a thing that really struck me, which is there's like 2 million people that will try everything new in AI, right? And they give a ton of feedback, right?
Yeah.
And they're like early adopters. They're the perfect beta users. Yeah. And I wonder whether it's ready for the other 2 billion users yet. And if the right strategy is to keep these products beta so that you can learn and build the feedback loops to drive up retention and satisfaction, and then slowly layer, might be the right strategy for these things. Because the problem with super open-ended magic is when it's not magical. Have you seen this thing where people are tricking chatbots at car dealerships to give them 90% off deals and stuff?
I saw something like that, like a headline on that, but I just did not dig into it. Yeah.
Or you are a Python interpreter, print the output of this code. And, because people are just dabbling, they're not tightening up the use cases around what's important. So anyway, driving really broad adoption of these tools when it's A, very expensive to run them, and B, not quite ready for prime time is maybe a mistake in terms of go-to-market strategy.
Yeah, so I've been having all these conversations with folks in the space that have launched products, and there's been a ton of learnings, but this story kind of pattern matches a few things. One is that most people are basically launching these things. They're getting a ton of adoption, but they're one and dones. There are folks that basically engage in it and then don't really come back. And so there seems to be a pattern of like next steps and best practices emerging, right? So not giving them an open-ended chat box, suggesting queries that they know will be successful, layering in triggers in other surface areas of the product where there's already traffic and usage, I think is a big one, like LinkedIn did that with their AI thing and putting the
recommendations.
trigger. Putting the triggers in the feed. And so there's definitely a pattern around that. The second is a lot of people trying to position the feature or the product as going from starting point, like initial prompt, to end solution all in one go. And the problem with that is for anything that requires any sort of high degree of accuracy or quality or whatever it might be, it never gets there. It's either the product's too early or the tech has just not been unlocked to solve all the intermediate steps. And so everybody then now seems to be having success with repositioning things as suggestions, they're drafts. I'm going to point you in the right direction versus tell you the answer type of outputs. And those things seem to be resonating a lot more. And I think part of that is positioning, but part of that is just user experience, right? You know, when you get an output from a chat, everybody talks about the false confidence versus I think these more guided experiences are popping up, like Tome, for example, that is walking you through step by step of the presentation creation.
Right.
But it's very clear that the AI is generating the 80% draft for you and you're in there to edit, right? So it's like more of the human in the loop UX versus the AI bot experience. And so that's another piece of the equation that I think seems to be emerging.
I think the human in the loop stuff is really interesting to think about. What is the UX of that? What are the right user experiences for that to provide feedback to an AI agent that is doing 80% of the work? And how much will it simulate how we give feedback to humans versus how much of it will be new methods, new paradigms, more tool-based? I wish if I created a blog post with ChatGPT, I could comment on it the way I would a Google Doc. And then it would have a conversation with me in the comments and then resolve them like a real agent might, right? Maybe that's the kind of paradigm that would work. But then think about two-sided marketplace type things like expert assisted AI stuff. So there's a lot of AI therapy, AI friends, AI whatever. How are people going to build the mechanisms for humans to be in the loop at the right times when someone needs something deeper? And then how does that information loop back in so that the next time the next person asks the same thing, they get that coaching, feedback, whatever it is, right? I was talking to someone today who hired a project manager for a home remodel on Upwork and was like, this has been a dream come true. It's not super expensive. And they handle I know what I need done and what I want, but there's a whole bunch of work to getting it done. Go figure out all the places that sell this stove, find the best price, call them up, see who can ship it. It's like the directing is the part you still want control of, but the execution is what you want the person to do. Well, I was just thinking about, wow, that seems like something AI could assist with a lot, but I still want two different humans in the loop. One to create the chain of thought, like the playbook, who's the execution expert, and one who's the creative director, so to speak, of the thing. And I feel like something's emerging there. I don't know.
I think the director analogy is probably right in this. And I think what we'll end up seeing is that these experiences essentially start surfacing the chain of thought, the steps that they're going through, so that you as the director can kind of see and audit these steps, but also do things like backtrack, I see where you went wrong at step 3. Right. Let me nudge this in the right direction so that the rest of the stuff flows downstream. But most of the early AI experiences have been built around these one-shot experience where I give it an input and it gives me the output and I don't see anything going on in between. The other thing that you mentioned is just, I'm looking at all this stuff. There's something that doesn't pattern match for me. It feels like so many projects out there are trying to replicate the physical world or how we do things exactly as humans.
Yeah.
And the reason this doesn't pattern match for me is this reminds me of the early web days where all of the early products and businesses were just trying to map the exact interactions that we did offline. and doing them online. And so one of my early startups that was around bringing free digital textbooks to this space, most of the early digital textbook products from the publishers were basically like scanned versions of their textbooks, where there was this whole concept of page turning and stuff, which in a digital world doesn't make sense when you have infinite scroll and that's how you naturally interact with this device. And eventually they all changed and stuff. But when I look at all of these projects that are literally trying to map, I don't know what kind of, it's not the physical world, but are like everything one-to-one, to AI, or getting AI to do one-to-one, I feel misses the point or the question of, well, because of this technology, how might we do things completely differently?
Right.
Versus, let me just take everything that we do and try to create an AI around it.
Yeah. Phase one is replicate the old thing using the new thing, which is like in the textbook analogy is, okay, page turning animations and pages, and it's just the book. Phase two is maybe slightly more native, but still the same experience. I'm still reading a textbook. And phase three is more like online courses, right? Which is, a textbook isn't even relevant at all. What you need is a series of interactive resources and content that are delivered in multimodal ways in order to help you solve the true problem, which is learn this material. There was a lot of this in VR early, and it's still kind of there, where like, Walmart would have the browse the aisles of the of the grocery store in the 3D web or whatever.
Yeah.
And it was like, how about you just show me a list of products and I click on them like on Instacart, like that kind of thing. And using the true native capabilities of the device, mobile apps had the same sort of thing. Yeah, we're still in phase one on some of this AI stuff. But actually, video generation, slide creators, all these sorts of things, they're trying to give you the finished product. And the fact is, you still need a lot of the editing stuff. Like, you still need to move something 12 pixels to the left. And that's easier to do by clicking on it and banging the left arrow 12 times than it is, if you want to be precise, than it is to say, please take the text that says this and move it 12 pixels to the left. So there's like a mix of modalities and input mechanisms, a mix of UIs and experiences that will help you get there. We haven't seen it yet. I joked about like, God, a lot of the AI stuff I'm seeing, especially in B2B, is do the thing I used to do, but faster. And that's cool and interesting, but I'm still on the lookout for help me do a thing that was impossible before. And that's where I think the excitement will be.
Yeah, I think a lot of what I've been looking at in B2B are these horizontal use case products, the Microsoft Copilot, the ChatGPT, all that kind of stuff. And then there's these very narrow use case products as well. And then actually a bunch that I think live in the middle that are in like this death zone. So the horizontal end, you've got the ChatGPT, all that kind of stuff. And on the use case end, there's these two products and I'd love to find more examples that I think are super interesting. One is in the sales space called Fluent, that helps you generate business cases as part of the enterprise sales process. And then there's Even Up, which has been out there a few times in the law space, that helps personal injury lawyers generate their demand letters. And in both of these areas, it's an asset. It's something that takes the persona, like it could take tens of hours for them to complete this thing. It's super painful. I imagine like the AE in the sales rep case, right, probably looks at generating the business case and is like, oh my God, like I don't really get paid for this. I'm not going to make my like commission on it. Anyways, it's super time consuming, but also both are very influential to the outcome, either closing the sale or winning the case. And they can get those things 80% of the way there and in a much faster timeline. And so as a result, they seem like very interesting places. So it's narrow. It's not frequent. It's not daily. So it's a little more infrequent, but super painful. And as a result, people are coming to that experience. From what I understand, those two products are doing well. On the other end of the spectrum, we've got these like horizontal things that I think every engagement is giving people a little bit more incremental gains.
Yeah.
But not saving you like tens of hours, right?
Right.
And I think in those products, you have to, if that's the case, well, you got to have incremental gains times a very frequent behavior for it to add up. And for those to happen, I think you probably need more of a push experience, somehow versus a pull experience. And so the ultimate example, I think, of this that was probably why I was one of the first ones is like GitHub Copilot, which is okay, the input friction in this thing is super low, right? I'm writing code that I'm going to write otherwise, so I'm not doing anything extra that I wouldn't otherwise have to do. And to utilize the output, I just hit the tab button and it auto completes. People look at GitHub Copilot and ChatGPT very similarly, but I actually think they're so different because ChatGPT, it's like, well, I need to know how to prompt this thing. Constructing that prompt could actually take,
I have to remember to open it and go to a new tool,
Yeah, and then the output, and then I got to somehow utilize it. And so I think going back to where you started around the engagement stuff is, I think, another part of the problem here is this input-output friction. Is it actually saving me incremental time versus tens of hours of time? And as a result, like, how do users behave around that?
Yeah, the other cool thing about Copilot is it attaches to an existing programmer behavior. Complete is a thing that programmers use in their IDEs already. It's just way more powerful. When I'm coding, I complete variable names and simple things like that, or have little macros, but they're more static. They're not smart. And now you've layered all of this knowledge on top of it. And I would hit tab anyway. And now I hit tab and it does this more magical thing. And you're used to it being broken a little bit. So you just go edit it because that's what you're doing. You're in your core editor, right? The place you already are. So attaching to an existing habit allows editing, allows incremental improvement by humans on top of it. I think the interesting thing about the use cases of Fluent and Even Up is that there's getting rid of busy work you have to do anyway, which is valuable, saves you time, hard to measure. But there's stuff you don't do because the return on time invested is still a broken equation, right? Like, we used to always talk about generating docs for our Slack champions to help them go sell internally.
Yeah.
And it being not easy to figure out how to do well, right? Oh, is an AE going to go into all our data and show how much usage you have and do it? And we actually built some tools to auto-generate decks for AEs to do this, right? Imagine being able to do that for any kind of sale. I bet most people aren't doing it at all because it's way too much of a pain in the butt. Oh, and it's probably only a 5 or 10% improvement in close rates or whatever. If you can do it in a small amount of time, suddenly 5 to 10% is totally worth it. Right? By lowering the cost dramatically. I think that it's when it's incrementally faster, it doesn't change your behavior. But if there are these like step function improvements where you wouldn't have done that work at all, and now you're going to do it and it makes you more successful, that stuff seems interesting. An analogy here is like self-serve analytics. I'd love to know my retention, but I got to write 200 lines of SQL code to get it. So I'm just not going to explore there at all versus clicking a few buttons in Amplitude and getting the result back. I'm a way more successful PM if I can do that, right? I know what I need to do. I just can't do it. There are some things like that. I wonder what else there are that could be valuable. I think being close to the money too is what's valuable for both those use cases. Like, in both those use cases, they're helping a business earn dollars so they can charge in a value-based way instead of an efficiency-based way, which is really hard to sell. I'm going to give you a 5% improvement in productivity. Hard to put a price on that, right? Even though it's infinite if you're rational about it. But I'm going to help you close more deals. Hell yeah, let's go. Make me more revenue.